Welcome back to Balance Patch Games in Allston, Massachusetts. I'm Sam Pletcher, and I'm alongside with June Lintner, and we are about ready to go into round 4.
Yeah, very exciting for round 4. We have some standing updates. There's one player who's undefeated so far. It's Anthony Foti, who I know we saw on stream earlier, is 3-0. We have 7 players who are 2-1, and we're seeing 2 of them on stream here in round 4. Lot to play for in this final round as well, because even that 3-0 is not guaranteed to make it into our top 4 cut, depending on resistance, opponent's win percentage, things like that. But taking a look at the players that we have for a round 4 matchup, it's going to be first Rockwell and Hoya, and a classic example of Rockwell's team building prowess right here. I love what I'm seeing in front of me.
I love me some Rockwell. I faced him for the first time at a cup way back last year, and just the stuff that I had looked at the team sheet, I couldn't believe what I was reading. This is actually, I would say this is one of the more tame Rockwell teams I've ever seen. But it does, of course, have some pretty unique sauce. It's got a smear goal with nothing too crazy. A lot of times smear goal will carry things like Decorate, the signature move of Alchemy. This one's got Fake Out, Follow Me, Spore, and Tailwind. But as is the case with a lot of smear goals, 4 moves that only smear goal has access to all 4 of them. Got a pretty classic Life Orb, Blood Moon, Metal Coat, Goldengo. There's a Baxcalibur with Swords Dance and Terra Ground Earthquake. And finally, a Armor Rouge with Terra Grass and Energy Ball. No Trick Room, no Wide Guard, no Expanding Force, just a straight-up attacking Covert Cloak Armor Rouge.
Yeah, I know Rockwell has been a big fan of this solo Armor Rouge throughout a lot of Regulation H. Had previously been using a version that had that Wide Guard on it, but deciding that Terra Grass and Energy Ball was just a little bit more important for this team, which I think is really interesting, because as we switch over to see his opponent, it's going to be Jonathan, and that Armor Rouge with Terra Grass and Energy Ball, I'm looking at a couple of Pokemon that really don't love to see it in that Garchomp and that Primarina.
Yeah, those are both Terra types. The Primarina especially can Terra into the ground type, which does not remove it of that grass weakness. So Terra Grass Energy Ball looking pretty good on the Primarina. The rest of Jonathan's team, a lot of these Pokemon, Garchomp, Corviknight, very often seen together. Garchomp can go for these big earthquakes while Corviknight is immune. This Corviknight deciding to go for the Tailwind, more speed support as opposed to setting itself up with something like Bulk Up. It can afford that because the Sneeze Alert carries Coaching, and that Terra Flying can be another real menace to be alongside that Garchomp as it boosts up with boosts the Garchomp stats with Coaching. Garchomp goes for Earthquakes, and Sneasler is immune as its Terra type.
Yeah, I think the Sneasler with Coaching is really, really, really cool in this game, because not only do you have, of course, that interaction between the Sneasler and the Garchomp, where you can Terra Fly and click Earthquake freely, you can also coach up next to your King Gambit, which doesn't have a boosting move of its own. It has Iron Head instead of Swords Dance that we see very commonly on those Black Glasses sets, which again should be Dread Plate, but that's neither here nor there. You can coach next to your Incineroar, which all of a sudden now becomes a very strong offensive Pokemon, and you boost next to your Corviknight to boost both its Brave Bird damage and its Body Press damage, because coaching, of course, raises attack and defense. I think that is the linchpin of this team, should be something that Rockwell is very keen on stopping, and to his credit, has some pretty decent answers to it in that Covert Cloak Armor Rouge, which cannot be, knocked down by the Dire Claw status activations, resist the close combats, and this Baxcalibur with the multi-hit move Icicle Spear, which I believe should always guarantee the KO with at least 4 hits onto the Sneasler.
Yeah, and one interesting thing about leaning all into that coaching strategy, and as you can see on Jonathan's side, is that it tends to really skew your team towards one side of the attacking spectrum. Between Sneasler, Garchomp, Corviknight, Kingambit, and Incineroar, that's a lot of physical damage, and the Primarina is the only special attacker on Jonathan's team. So if Rockwell can find a way, he doesn't have any Iron Defense move, no Stamina, no Intimidate, nothing like that. That could give Jonathan the real advantage, because there's nothing that Rockwell has to truly mitigate the physical damage that's coming out from Jonathan's side.
And we are going to see it, 2 of those strong physical attackers right away in the Sneasler and the Kingambit, staring down this Smeargle right off the bat next to the Armor Rouge. I think Armor Rouge is pretty well positioned here, just as I mentioned, dealing with that Sneasler very well, and threatens a lot of damage into the Kingambit. Armor Rouge holding on to Armor Cannon instead of Heat Wave makes it both very, very strong as a move, and it cannot miss. So this Armor Cannon into a Kingambit, even if it goes into that Terra Dark, would do a ton of damage.
Yeah, Armor Cannon, I feel like not seen a lot on many Armor Rouge. A lot of, like you said, opting for Heat Wave, especially on those Zyspan teams. Heat Wave, Expanding Force. But Armor Rouge really gives, or Armor Cannon giving Armor Rouge that single target burst damage. Doesn't look like Rockwell's going for it here. We see a Terra coming out. I believe that's on Jonathan's side, and that's going to be the King Gambit. So that's probably trying to defend it from from a stab armor cannon that probably would have one-shot the King Gambit had it not gone for the Terra. But it doesn't look like Rockwell decided to go on the offensive right away.
No, and Rockwell actually protecting this Armor Rouge while the Smeargle, I believe, is going to set Tailwind. The close combat comes out and the Smeargle will survive just at 1 HP on this Focus Sash. And we'll see what the Smeargle does. I would imagine it's going to be a Tailwind just to try to get that speed control on his side. Could, though, be this Spore that we're seeing into the Sneasler, another very strong option. The slower Spore than the Sneasler, the kind of thing that can really give you a big advantage in this game, because Sneasler now has taken 0 mandatory turns of sleep, is guaranteed to be asleep next turn, and your Smeargle getting that special attack boost, very, very big.
And lowering the defense, which is huge, seeing as that it's at 1 HP. You know, one reason to run this type of set on Smeargle, you might wonder why to run 4 rather standard moves on Smeargle, a Pokemon that gets any move in the game. Well, one, of course, this combination is unique to Smeargle. Jump Pluff can approximate 3 out of those 4 moves with Tailwind and Rage Powder, but those moves aren't quite as reliable as Spore and Follow Me. And Smeargle, in this case, can set Tailwind and also be the fastest, a fast Spore user, which is something that doesn't really exist in the game, for good reason. But if a Smeargle itself can set Tailwind, it can Spore things, and if it doesn't need to put on that kind of pressure, it can simply Follow Me. So really creative team building from Rockwell here, and forces a switch on a sleeping Smeargle, or on a sleeping Sneasler. In will come the Incineroar, hoping to take some moves from this Armor Rouge, and it's going to lower the attack of the Smeargle. We'll see what Rockwell went for into the King Gambit. Is it going to be a Spore?
Yeah, we saw the Terastallization from Armor Rouge. I believe we saw a double up into the Sneasler slot with Psychic and Spore. The Psychic, of course, will do 0 damage to this Incineroar. It's the Dark type immune. But a Spore into that Incineroar slot would be devastating for Jonathan's game. Now, again, the same position as the Sneasler, has not taken any turns of sleep, and cannot click its Fake Out on this next turn. Now the King Gambit, left all alone on this turn, will be able to click a Terra Dark Black Glasses boosted Kowtow Cleave. And with the defense drop,
Smeargle.
I think the defense drop mattered on that one, Sam.
I think it did. No crit, but Rockwell can only get so lucky. Here comes, it looks like Rockwell deciding which Pokemon to bring out now. It's going to be that Blood Moon Ursaluna with its very high physical defense. So a really good Pokemon to bring into Jonathan's team, especially with the Smeargle, or with the Sneasler out of commission. The Ursaluna can now be pretty free to fire off some big damaging attacks, and I wonder if an Armor Cannon into a Hyper Voice from the Ursaluna is enough to pick up this Terra King Gambit.
I would imagine it is. It no longer resists the Hyper Voice, and it's no longer weak to the Armor Cannon. I would think that both of those neutral hits should be enough here. The tricky part for Rockwell is, of course, King Gambit can still protect as Incineroar takes its mandatory turn of sleep. The other questions are, what's the speed interaction here between Ursaluna and Incineroar? We're going to see right now, as the Incineroar does move before this Ursaluna, puts things a little bit in a precarious situation. And because we saw the Ursaluna Blood Moon coming out this turn, and the Pokemon that's in the back for Rockwell, that of course being the Excalibur that we had seen while he was switching, nothing really wants to see Sneasler now, because the Armor Rouge has Terastallized into a Grass type. You now put yourself in a position where, yes, Sneasler, the next time it hits the field, is guaranteed to stay asleep, but you have to take care of that Sneasler on that turn. Otherwise, it could just wake up and completely ruin your game plan. This Armor Cannon, though, coming out, and we do see that very, very considerable damage for that coming out into the King Gambit. Incineroar taking its second turn of sleep now. There's a 50% chance for that to wake up. And now a Blood Moon should be more than enough to knock out this King Gambit.
Yeah, the Blood Moon into Armor Cannon, definitely playing it safe in terms of damage rolls, not leaving anything up to chance. King Gambit never had a chance to attack in the first place. Also never went for a Sucker Punch, which could have done some, pretty substantial chip, especially given all the modifiers. If it targets into the Armor Rouge, I wonder, Terra, Dark, Black Glasses, Sucker Punch into a -1 Armor Rouge? That might have had a chance to, maybe even pick it up.
It would have only been -1 after that Armor Cannon. The Sucker Punch would have gone off beforehand, so the
right.
Armor Rouge still at neutral defense. I should be enough to deal with that, because the Armor Rouge, another Pokemon with naturally very good defense. There's a Pokemon that I talked to Rockwell about a decent bit as I was thinking about, ways to beat other Psychic Spam teams. That Wide Guard Solo Armor Rouge, a staple in Rockwell's team building, as I mentioned in the preview. That Pokemon, 125 base defense. It's very, very bulky on that side. A Sneasler will take its mandatory turn of sleep here. And again, this is where I think Rockwell does have to play around this Sneasler very cautiously, launching a Psychic immediately into that slot. Will not bring it down to Focus Sash. And this should just be a Hyper Voice to clean that slot up. As Incineroar wakes up, clicks Flare Blitz, but it goes into the Flash Fire Armor Rouge. Rockwell, little Jedi mind trick there with the Terastallization, seeing, the super effective button, because the game will tell you, fire move is super effective into grass types, not when that ability is active.
Yeah, Armor Rouge, I feel like, is a Pokemon that doesn't usually make use of its ability. I think in a lot of the Psy Spam teams, unless you're running some weak Armor Cheese with some side attacks, usually Flash Fire is not a move that activates. A lot of people don't bring fire type attacks into Psy Spam mode, so it's understandable that Jonathan forgets that Armor Rouge's ability gives it immunity to fire attacks. It makes that grass type Terra all that much more inviting. And Armor Rouge, as you can see, is very important that Rockwell keeps it alive, because Jonathan's last Pokemon is the Corviknight. And that's a Pokemon that takes resisted damage from Ursaluna's stabs. It's a Pokemon that's not going to take a ton from Baxcalibur. So Rockwell needed to conserve that Armor Rouge in order to be able to beat the Corviknight in the endgame. He has now done that, assuming, of course, that he keeps the Armor Rouge safe from the Incineroar. Armor Rouge will be moving first, so that will not be an issue. And an Armor Cannon will one-shot the Corviknight and give Rockwell a win in Game 1.
Yeah, and that's the entire reason to run Armor Cannon over something like Heat Wave, is you have a 120 base power move now as opposed to the 90 base power move that is Heat Wave, and you give yourself a much stronger single target attack that will never miss. We saw even with 2 defense drops on this Armor Rouge 2, just another credit to its physical bulk, that super effective U-turn from Incineroar, not even enough to knock it out. That was at -2 defense.
Yeah, Armor Rouge really kind of showing off in that battle. Initially being immune to anything that the Sneasler wanted to do. Well, not immune necessarily, but not having to worry about any fake-out flinches, any Dire Claw status effects. And then, once the Incineroar came out on the field, didn't have to worry about a fake-out, and then was able to just snipe things down with the Armor Cannon since the King Gambit was occupied attacking its partner. So Armor is really showing out there, and I wonder if Jonathan will kind of adjust his game plan next game to try to focus down the Armor Rouge a little bit more, so that maybe some of his Pokemon like Corviknight can have a little more leeway in the endgame.
Yeah, and I think Corviknight could be one of those Pokemon that actually is a decent answer to the Armor Rouge in itself. If you can get yourself into a position where you can get the Tailwind up, now all of a sudden you have these super effective Brave Birds if Armor Rouge decides to Terra Grass. The Incineroar, of course, is a great answer into this Armor Rouge because, unlike many others, it's not carrying any coverage moves to hit the Fire and Dark typing. No Aura Sphere. I believe it gets Scorching Sands as well.
Yeah,
if it wants to try
sometimes
to
they'll
hit
run
that.
Meteor Beam with Power Herb. So
Meteor Beam with
another
Power
thing
would
to
be very
hit
cool.
Incineroars, but Rockwell's has none of that. You're right.
No, so no way for the Armor Rouge to hit that Pokemon. So I'd expect to see the Incineroar here. And for Rockwell's side, trying to find a way around that Pokemon, because nothing else on your team really loves to see the Incineroar either. It intimidates the Baxcalibur. It is, again, resists all the moves that your Golden Go has. Your Hydreigon can click. It has Draco Meteor into that Pokemon, but with the Assault Vest, you're really not doing that much damage. So I think it really comes down to either positioning the Baxcalibur in such a way to click your Earthquake into the Incineroar without being intimidated, or using that Ursaluna Blood Moon like we saw at the very end of that game to just click Earth Power and do damage. I think for the most part, Rockwell was very successful in just navigating some of the offensive pressure that Jonathan was able to put out. But if he just does the same thing, I feel like Jonathan can adjust pretty well.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing that Jonathan's going to have to worry about is this Smeargle, because if you look at Jonathan's team, he has no natural defense against Sleep or any sort of Spore, Sleep Powder, anything like that. There's no Terra Grass anywhere, except for the Assault Vest Incineroar. There's no Safety Goggles, there's no Lumberry, no Terrain, no Taunt. So Jonathan is very exposed to a Smeargle that can click Spore. And Rockwell really took advantage of that in game one by even sporing a slot that was already asleep with that double up. So you'll see Jonathan adjust here, and the Primarina is actually going to be one of the first Pokemon that comes out, being led alongside the Sneasler. Same exact lead for Rockwell here. It's the Smeargle next to the Armarouge.
Yeah, and I think this lead for Rockwell is pretty safe, especially here in game two, because you're up 1-0 in this set. You say, cards on the table, this is what I've got into your team. Show me that you can beat the Smeargle and the Armarouge lead first, and then make me adjust into something different. I think the big change here, though, is because the Primarina is staring you down, now the Smeargle has to think a little bit harder about this turn. You can't just very freely click your Spore into the Sneasler slot because the Primarina has its Hyper Voice. That's a spread move. You really do have to Terrastallize this Armarouge because, again, you can't redirect this Hyper Voice because it's a spread move from your Armarouge. But something like a Dire Claw into that Armarouge plus a Hyper Voice is really, really threatening and should just about guarantee a KO from Jonathan's side, whether it's a Follow Me coming out from Smeargle or not.
Absolutely, but the other thing that the Smeargle can do is it can Spore. Jonathan does not have Fake Out on his Sneasler, and so he decides to just go straight for the close combat and bring the Smeargle down to its Focus Sash. But I believe Smeargle will be faster than the Primarina, so it will get a chance to do something here. Rockwell deciding to commit the Terra to the Armarouge to keep it safe from any sort of, Hyper Voice attacks from the Primarina. Smeargle not going for a Spore, instead opting for Tailwind. Psychic coming out into the Sneasler, that'll bring the Sneasler down to its Sash. I think, Rockwell deciding to trade Speed Control for a little bit of damage. We'll see what each of these trainers have in the back to see who, comes out of the better of that turn one. Because Hyper Voice here is going to knock out the Smeargle. That Spore pressure is gone. But, of course, Rockwell does now have +2 speed on his side.
Yes, I think that Tailwind is a much better use of the Smeargle's time out of that first turn. And we do see a little bit of a change here. No Baxcalibur on Rockwell's side. Instead, it's going to be that Golden Go coming out here in game two. I was excited to see that Baxcalibur. There really doesn't look like there's a great answer to something like an Energy Ball plus an Earthquake. You Energy Ball the Primarina and click Earthquake next to that with your Baxcalibur. Now, though, you still have a Metal Coat or Golden Go, which...
You almost said Iron Plate.
It was very close because it should be Iron Plate. That'll be my one critique from Rockwell so far in this set, is it should be Iron Plate on that Golden Go. But you brought up at the very beginning of this set, Sam, this Primarina's Terra Ground. It can't get away from its weakness to grass moves. Forced to switch out here into the King Gambit, a great answer to both of these Pokemon as it stands right now. But the Sneasler, still faster because of the Unburden from bringing down to its Focus Sash. Still faster than the Armarouge, gets to Dire Claw before the Armarouge attacks, and a Terra Grass Energy Ball coming out into this King Gambit that newly switched in. Not going to do that much damage.
All of a sudden, this momentum has really switched towards Jonathan. I think Rockwell, like you mentioned, had the advantage there with that turn one trade. Smeargle, being removed from the field is actually rather beneficial because now the partner gets all 3 turns of Tailwind. But in bringing in that King Gambit, that was almost a perfect switch for Jonathan because now that the Armarouge is at very low health, the Golden Go is still the fastest thing on the field, and there is nothing better to deal with a Golden Go than a King Gambit on the other side. So Jonathan now in the driver's seat. We'll see how Rockwell reacts to it. There's a Terrastalization coming out now from Jonathan's side, and it's going to be that King Gambit to increase the power of its Dark-type attacks, but that also removes its resistance to Steel-type attacks. I think Jonathan's betting on the fact that the Sucker Punch will pick up the Golden Go, and he better be right about that.
Yeah, it looks like Rockwell not playing around that too much, and it will pick up that one-hit KO with the Terra Dark. Depending on how that Golden Go is trained on Rockwell's side, the Terrastalization not mandatory for Jonathan, but the close combat coming out into the Armarouge. And after that turn one, when Rockwell was knocking the Sneasler down to its Focus Sash, I saw him laugh after that turn. I thought he was laughing because he got the critical hit with a 4-time super effective move. I think he might have been laughing at himself just a little bit, thinking about, now this Sneasler, because I gave it Unburden, now it is faster. It is going to threaten everything on my side, and just an Ursaluna Blood Moon in the back, not going to be enough to deal with all 4 of Jonathan's Pokemon. What looked like a very strong turn one from Rockwell turned entirely on its head because of that Sneasler's ability, and becomes a pretty convincing win for Jonathan.
Yeah, that's an excellent analysis right there. The ability of the Sneasler really pulled that match back up for Jonathan. And I think I missed Rockwell's reaction there, but I think you're right. I think that's what he was noticing. And, that with also committing the Terra on turn one, Rockwell didn't have any more resources to protect the Golden Go, which I think he was expecting to kind of clean house under the Tailwind. You know, it doesn't matter that the Sneasler is faster than the Golden Go. The Sneasler can't touch it. But next to a King Gambit, you know, then all of a sudden everything is flipped on its head. So Jonathan was really able to kind of conserve his own resources while forcing Rockwell to expend, you know, the Terra on turn 1, losing the Smeargle, which is the most valuable support on turn 1. I think that was able to, you know, really shift the momentum of that battle. And, you know, I'm really interested to see where we go in Game 3 if Rockwell decides to try to keep going with the same strategy, or if he wants to switch things up.
Yeah, I didn't dislike how Rockwell played that game. I think the big thing for me is that there was no Baxcalibur in that game. The Golden Go to me is a little bit of a curious choice to bring as, you know, one of those back Pokemon, just because on the other side you have an Assault Vest Incineroar, you have a King Gambit with Sucker Punch, you have a Primarina that's known for its special defense, and, you know, while it doesn't resist Make It Rain, if it's not a super effective hit into Primarina on the special side, it may as well be a resist. You also have a Corviknight that resists all of your attacks, and a Garchomp that will hit you super effectively with those ground moves, and it's a Terra Steel Golden Go. You can't get away from that weakness. I think the Golden Go, for me, I thought was very interesting up until that King Gambit came out onto the field. Then things get a little bit scary. I think if Rockwell has Baxcalibur in the back of that game, you then don't knock Sneasler down to Focus Sash that first turn. You can target into Primarina pretty safely. You get Tailwind up, and now your Baxcalibur is threatening, again, that multi-hit Icicle Spear. That's the best way to deal with a Pokemon like Sneasler outside of what he did Game 1, just putting it to sleep. You can do so much damage there and just pick up that KO through the Focus Sash.
Looks like Jonathan's really switching things up for Game 3. It's going to be the Garchomp and the Corviknight. Rockwell also making a change. It's not going to be the Armarouge that's leading. It's going to be the Baxcalibur. So the Baxcalibur that June was mentioning, that comes out turn 1, not in the back. So now we have a completely new board state. It'll be really interesting to see what these trainers decide to go for right away. Rockwell looks like considering setting up a Tailwind with the Smeargle. Right now, that Baxcalibur is kind of in danger. The Garchomp is going to be the fastest thing on the field, and a super effective Life Orb Dragon Claw will really do a number on the Baxcalibur. Of course, the Baxcalibur can change its own type and threaten back with an Icicle Spear, so there are a lot of dynamics at play on this turn 1. Rockwell is going to go for the Terra Ground Swords Dance on the Baxcalibur. It's risky. It's a risky move, Cotton. We'll see if it pays off.
Yeah, I think it's an extremely risky move because the Corviknight on the other side also has Tailwind. And if Jonathan, you know, just not Dire Claws, Dragon Claws into this Baxcalibur, sets his own Tailwind, now you just Dragon Claw into Baxcalibur again because this Baxcalibur does not have a priority move, something like Ice Shard. Rockwell, though,
however,
a far better player than you or I, Sam, gets the Garchomp Protect turn correct, gets the Swords Dance up for free, is no longer, you know, in danger of being KO'd. Two trainers just trade Tailwinds, but now you have a +2 Baxcalibur just rearing and ready to go at this point.
Smeargle getting a rather inconsequential Moody boost, special defense +2, defense -1. If that had been speed, this game might be over because then the Smeargle can just spam fast spores and the Garchomp can't do a thing about it. What Rockwell does have going for him is the follow me pressure, which makes it very difficult for the Garchomp to commit a Dragon Claw onto the Baxcalibur, because the risk there is that the Dragon Claw won't do anything to the Baxcalibur. It'll just be redirected into the Smeargle, and the Smeargle will get a free hit. So the Garchomp, despite, you know, still being able to be the fastest thing on the field because the Tailwinds were matched, isn't quite exerting as much offensive pressure as it probably would like to. We actually see the Earthquake coming out from the Baxcalibur first. Is that what I think it is? Does the Baxcalibur outspeed the Garchomp?
That's what it's looking like. And that Earthquake does a ton of damage to this Garchomp. Nothing to Corviknight, of course, with the Flying Terastallization. But it's a very curious Earthquake from Rockwell's side because the Earthquake from Garchomp comes out, and now your Smeargle faints because you brought it down to its Focus Sash.
What a turn. And the Corviknight's going to go for a Body Press into the Baxcalibur. That's not going to do very much damage at all. But now, you know, what's Rockwell going to bring out? Is it going to be the Blood Moon? Is it going to be the Armarouge? The Corviknight is at full health. That thing's going to need to be taken down. The Garchomp is at low enough health that even an Icicle Spear into a Terra Fire Garchomp is going to take it out. So Rockwell deciding to bring in the Armarouge and threaten that Armor Cannon onto the Corviknight. We're just going to see who can trade the most damage during these 2 turns of Tailwind and who comes out on top after that. There's going to be a lot of things to consider here. For the viewers at home, keep in mind that this Corviknight has a Terra type of Fighting. so it can't get away from any neutral hits to Icicle Spear. It can remove its weakness to Armor Cannon, so, maybe that'll happen?
Yes, I think that's a very key interaction this turn at least, is does the Corviknight Terrastalize here? Of course, like you had mentioned, the Armor Rouge can hit it super effectively whether it Terrastalizes or not, and should one-hit KO it whether it Terrastalizes or not if it clicks the super effective move. Of course, the Baxcalibur being faster than the Garchomp really shifts this game into Rockwell's favor. The Icicle Spear comes out, no Terrastalization on any of these turns from Jonathan, staring down what we now know is a faster Baxcalibur with a 4-time super effective move and an Armor Rouge with a super effective move into the Corviknight as well, and it looks like it'll just be 2 KOs for Rockwell here, now taking a 3-2 Pokemon lead in this contest.
Yeah, those unexpected speed interactions really decided who got the better of this Tailwind Mirror, because as soon as that Baxcalibur moved before the Garchomp, it was going to be outputting a lot of damage, and there was nothing that Jonathan could really do about it. The last 2 Pokemon from Jonathan are going to be revealed here. It's the Kingambit and the Sneasler. I think if any 2 Pokemon can pull it back, it's probably these 2. The Sneasler now takes over the mantle of fastest Pokemon on the field. I don't think even this Turbo Baxcalibur is going to be outspeeding that. And if the Kingambit Terras into, maybe Jonathan was saving that Terra for the Kingambit, because if it removes that fire weakness, it can pretty easily one-shot this Armor Rouge. And 2 KOs here from Jonathan's side might flip the game back once again.
Yeah, that's what I'm seeing. This Terra Dark Kingambit, there's nothing that really stops that alongside this Sneasler that still has its Focus Sash available. Of course, like we've mentioned, no fake-out pressure from the Sneasler. It has coaching instead on that slot. But this Armor Rouge at -1 defense, no way to Terrastalize out of its weakness to a Sucker Punch, and we're likely seeing this Kingambit go to become a Dark type just for safety, just to make sure. We had already seen this Armor Rouge survive some hits that were a little bit surprising. I don't know if there is a way out for Rockwell here, just between the Sucker Punch and close combat pressure that Jonathan's outputting.
Yeah, Armor Rouge going for the 3 attacks plus Protect. There's no mind games in terms of, is it going to click something like Trick Room or Will-O-Wisp to, mess with the Kingambit Sucker Punch. Very safe for Jonathan to just go for that Sucker, and with the Terra, the Black Glasses, and the -1 this time on the Armor Rouge, no way out. And the close combat's going to go into the Baxcalibur, take that out, and I think, Jonathan now has got a Kingambit, got a Sneasler with the Focus Sash still intact. This might be curtains.
Yeah, there's nothing on Rockwell's team that can really come out here in this situation. We, of course, know that it is the Blood Moon Ursaluna as the 4th Pokemon. That Goldengo, the Hydreigon, weak to Dark and fighting respectively. Nothing that can really come out here to shift this battle, and it looks like Jonathan will be able to take this win, go to 3-1 on the day. He already had the highest resistance of all the 2-1 players entering this round, locks himself a place in Top Cut, and not an easy schedule to do it. There's a reason his resistance was so high.
Yeah, absolutely. He was playing like somebody who was taking down some good competition, and I think those games are especially difficult because when you're battling hyper offense like the team that Rockwell put together, you need to have a good idea of what you can let take damage and what you cannot let take damage. And I think Jonathan did an especially great job of playing his Kingambit, knowing that, on the time that Rockwell brought Goldengo, that Kingambit needed to stay in the back and be that emergency Goldengo answer, but also being able to answer the Armor Rouge after using Terra Dark. Jonathan used that Kingambit exceptionally well, and it kept Rockwell from really being able to put his foot on the gas and choke his team out under the Tailwind.
Yeah, it really was the Kingambit coming in the back on those games 2 and 3 that was the difference here. The Kingambit led in game 1 and was just not able to win those damage trades like you were saying, but when Kingambit comes in the back, it is one of the best cleanup Pokemon in the world. You ask any singles player, and they'll tell you that exact same thing. All it does is just win games from positions that don't look too great for it. And those positions looked pretty good for Kingambit in games 2 and 3. So Jonathan moving on to Top Cut here with that team. Again, the Sand team without Sand.
Pretty much.
You love to see it.
Yeah.
It's very, very exciting. A lot of Corviknight representation here today. Sure, we'll see a lot of that in Top Cut as well. That we'll be right back for after this break.